I want to go back into the discussion with all of you. And I want to start at one point where Victor mentioned that one of the problems, maybe looking back on the last 10 years and the Sustainable Development Goals, sustainable development, one of the problems that we have is that we have created progress. Sometimes it's not mentioned enough, but by the way, we have basically eliminated child mortality in the last 10 years. It's one of the goals of the SDGs. It's not nothing. We had child mortality pretty severe 10 years ago. It's almost eliminated. If we look at the number of access to electricity, access to the internet, we have made on a global scale huge progress. But I think fact is, and you mentioned it in Costa Rica, that many of the individuals have not benefited or have a sense of not having benefited from this development. Now, how can we address this issue? Costa Rica is not a typical ODA country, so it's a very successful country also in terms of creating entrepreneurship and so on. Can you maybe share a little bit from your perspective what needs to be done to mobilize the individuals in a country like Costa Rica in order to make sure that we benefit from development on a larger scale?
Thanks, Markus. Yes, I think, as I mentioned before, we have to make efforts to put the individual at the center of this discussion because, from the international perspective, things could be pretty clear what we have to do. Then governments are ruled by domestic politics, and they have to address the challenges of their constituents. And I think the real challenge is to win the hearts and minds of the people. And you have to make a very strong case, for example, why we care about climate change, for example. So in countries like mine, where our share of the problem is very small, so how can you approach people and say, oh, you should not use your car, or you should be more conscious about lighting and turn off the lights and things like that, or to farmers. So you have to improve your ways of doing things because the manure, or you have to shut down your farm practices because of climate change. So it's a very difficult challenge to tackle when the benefits are not right there. Going back to your main question is, so how do we do it? I think investments, have to follow business opportunities. But the thing is, for example, in the case of countries that are dependent on foreign direct investment, Costa Rica receives about 5% of GDP is FDI, and that translates into an exporting platform that accounts for like 40% of GDP. So in these days when the rules are changing so fast, how do you convince a company to invest or to reinvest when you're not sure about the tariffs, you're not sure about the incentives you're going to take if, for example, if the U.S. decides to offer companies, well, don't invest abroad, I will exempt you for your taxes. So these days, companies are on hold. They are not deciding to make new investments. So then this is a great challenge these days. The other thing is, for example, how you convince tourists to come to your country when there are all these geopolitical problems around the world. So in a nutshell, we are under very, very troubling circumstances for countries like that rely on openness. And if you don't have economic development these days, it's very tricky to talk about other goals that could not be achieved without these institutions, that we could not be achieved without financial flows.
You know both ecosystems, Costa Rican, Swiss ecosystem in terms of entrepreneurship, innovation, and so on. Is there anything we can learn from each other?
Well, for sure. You will laugh at this, but in our part of the world, we are known as the Switzerland of the Americas. Many countries like to be Swiss. But I think we have relied on institutions since the very beginning, and I think that's values, as Pascal was saying, is very important for us. So we share that. We share this value proposition of neutrality. Well, we have tried to achieve that. Of course, it's very difficult when you have Big Brother over there, very near. But I think the most common value that we share is democracy. We believe in direct democracy. And so from that on, we believe also on the power of the individual, as here in Switzerland. So those are, I think, the commonalities. Unfortunately, the second part of the 20th century and the first half of this century, government have grown a lot, and I think that has squeezed a little bit the individuality.
You mentioned that there is a hesitance, companies hesitate, individuals hesitate to invest in the current situation with all these insecurities. Yet we have seen, and Roland, you have emphasized it very clearly, we need to move from financing to investments. How do we cope with this current situation that we actually need much more investment, but on a global scale, there's a lot of hesitance. How do we go about this double challenge?
That's a big topic. I would say maybe 2 points. One is we have to be honest with ourselves, and I call it manage expectations. So too often still today, especially in Switzerland, I would say more Geneva than Zurich, which is more my area, but I hear too often people selling their fund or company or whatever under impact investment label, which by the way means everything and nothing. There's no regulation whatsoever, so you can call it whatever you want under this kind of umbrella brand of impact investment. But there's too many people selling that by selling great return. Example, I was last year asked to come at a conference of a very big, which will remain nameless, private banker in Geneva, and they asked me, and they're launching the new fund on agriculture, resilience, whatever. And they advertised 25% IRR for the next 6-7 years. And then I said, at the end, they never invited me again afterwards, but at the end, I just asked a question. I like to be a little bit self-critical. I said, I just have a question, sir. So what you're telling us is you believe that with this kind of agriculture fund, you can both save the planet, help was mostly about Southern America, thousands of farmers, and then make basically 3 times better the SMI. I think it's very unfair because you deserve the Nobel Prize for economics because you've just found, the golden goose. You want to do impact, you should make money, but you're not going to maximize. Why is private equity not investing in Africa outside mining? There's a reason why. Because the model doesn't work. I mean, the model P works, but not works when you talk about sustainable long-term investments, because the definition of P is as much return as quick as possible. I'm not saying it's bad, I'm just saying it doesn't fit the requirements that we have in Africa. So, let's be honest, you want to do impact, you can do impact, you can make some money, but you're not going to become filthy rich by doing this. By the way, you're going to save thousands of lives. I'm not going to go to give a price to a life, but I think let's agree that a price of a human life is pretty expensive. I would agree. Second is just a small side story. Since you are representative of the Bundesrat, I had the lunch off the record. I had the lunch with one of the Bundesrat last year, who is more on the left side. And then I said, I just have a solution regarding TETSA, Swiss Development Corporation. We all know the budget of, I think, 2.3 billion Swiss franc. Said, ma'am, I just would like to tell you that I think I have solutions. I think half the budget of TETSA is useless. We can tell you, I don't know which half, but half is useless. And I have a proposal, which is only half a joke, is why don't you introduce a concept of tax holidays for Swiss SMEs to invest in Africa. So it won't cost more to the Confederation, to the budget of the country, but basically half your SDC budget is going to go to encourage Swiss companies to invest in Africa, which would never do that otherwise, under a form of tax holidays based on the number of jobs you create or whatever. She said, interesting, but probably tricky.
Well, you will understand that I will not speak for the Bundesrat.
My point is...
But I would like to follow up on this. So it's an interesting idea that shows that there's a potential in working with the public sector, in especially also managing the risk component in Africa and elsewhere. What is your PPP proposal in this regard? What is your public-private partnership proposal? Do you see any potential in instruments that help bring down the country risk? You mentioned we need to look at business model risks rather than country risks. There are instruments like blended finance and so on. Our development corporation is very much looking into this. Do you see potential in this?
In good German, Jein. I would say, so I'm very old-fashioned, is I don't want to work with governments, I don't want help from government, just stay away from it. So the least I'm involved with any kind of public authorities, the better I am, because especially when you work in environment like in Africa, usually governments can rather give you trouble than help you, and I'm too proud to beg anybody to help me. So I'm a kind of 20th, my wife would say 19th century kind of guy. So that's my own problem. But I would say on the other side, what is true, if you look at the numbers, public aid 70 billion and private. So to be fair, there's no way we're going to change a continent like Africa without public money. I mean, that would be because the private sector, I'm sorry, is too greedy or too risk adverse to really go the big numbers. So I believe really in two things. One is through conference like this, kind of raise the sensitivity to investors. You have investing in Africa and investing in Africa. So I believe a lot of communication, a lot of preconceived ideas are there which needs to be talked about, and if I can help. But at the same time, yes, government, the tricky part with government is governance. Because we are, and what I'm going to say is very tricky, so I don't want to be misunderstood, but we live in a world where governance has become the rule. And great, that's fine. We all want more honesty and more transparency. The problem is, example, our company had bank account in Luxembourg, we've been told, well, we cannot deal with any company being in the DRC because of your country risk, and therefore we're closing your accounts. So, because if we have companies in DRC, our grade within the governance and ESG or God knows what will be downgraded. So, this is like a never-ending story, you know. Of course, we're all for governance. Of course, we're all for good practice, but we're going so far that it's actually discouraging investments.
Yeah. And it's a problem of perception. We have examples that show that, a riot in the streets of Nairobi will lead to an increase of the country risk of Senegal, right?
And
there are...
and by the way, there's never any riots in Switzerland or Europe, of course.
Right.
I'm from Lausanne, last year we had massive riots in Lausanne. So,
I like panelists who are provocative. It's usually stimulating the discussion. But I want to jump to Risto with the public-private partnership. I would like to go a little bit deeper into, you also mentioned it, how do you see the collaboration with governments, both Swiss government and, let's say, local governments, when you work on building resilient infrastructure in a country?
I mean, very honestly speaking, our main focus, or for the time being at least, our main business is still on the private sector. But as mentioned before, I think, all of these companies that we work together with, I mean, they either depend on electricity, on the availability of water, on a water treatment plant. So it very quickly goes into the public sector. And there, I mean, I think, in most of the cases, especially, it goes then through the company itself. So because, I mean, we're too distant ourselves, so it's let's say, the local site management team that has the connections with the local authorities. But we just can highlight, okay, how do the different hazards, how could they potentially correlate with each other or make each other worse? So this is one part. And then, yes, we have some collaborations. We also work together. I think that's an example also which is publicly available with the city of Madrid. Extreme heat becomes more and more a challenge. In many big cities also, as a reflex, we tend to think about Southern Europe or so, but it also in the more northern parts becomes a challenge. And there, by providing data and closely collaborating with these city authorities, we managed to support them to kind of reduce these heat islands that can build up in cities.
Has this led into concrete also business opportunities? The fact that the city of Madrid is now more resilient?
Yes, absolutely, yes. And also, I mean, currently or last year we published a study, a paper regarding the transition from, to more a sustainable energy supply for 5 countries in Europe. So we always, or as a reflex also, you may think, okay, more about developing countries, but this also poses challenges here in Central Europe. So the countries involved, I think, were the UK, Germany, France, Italy or so. And there also, because many of these power suppliers, they've been running power plants, traditional power plants for a long time. They have a lot of experience. But these new type of technologies, I mean, be it solar power plants, be it wind turbines, they're exposed to a different set of natural hazard perils, which bring up new challenges for them. And this is where we can support them.
Jason, I would like to take you up a little bit more on the VC investment into green tech perspective. What can you tell us a bit about your experience as a VC?
Yeah, I think this is definitely relevant for SDG because the venture capital actually benefits, I would say, in the last 20 years, if you look at the return, especially in US and China, mostly driven by the digital development. Mm-hmm. And digital development is also based on the good infrastructure like telecommunication, and this actually needs governmental support at the beginning. And now come to the green technology or come to the renewable energy, there are quite a lot of observation from my experiences that actually technology is mostly in Europe. From the best institution like ETH or in Germany, a lot of research institute. But then if you look at who harvests it, it's basically, I would say, 2 parts. One is this manufacturing company in the last 15 years based in China. So solar panel, wind turbine, and later on this battery. Actually, battery, China also start relatively later compared with Japan and Germany, but I think in these 2 countries, there's no, let's say, risk kind of their risk-averse appetite, or some big company don't want to do too fast. And then in China, they have this, earlier entrepreneurship and also the venture capital, and then this really back to this PPP. I think we say also need to cooperate with very well in this governmental policy, because without this systematic support, the risk for the VC is super high that they probably don't want to take further risk. So I think in China, this part is managed better than what I observe in Europe. In US is another scenario. I was in Harvard. I think there the culture is already there. They are not afraid of losing money. They are rather, this ultra rich or this Silicon Valley, this tech, kind of giant. They want to bet on something. So I think what I want to share right now is if you look at current stage between Europe and China, maybe the common interest or the great synergy would be this renewable infrastructure, which can, kind of attract a lot of large amount of, this investment from sustainability angle, but also the VC, which has, know-how to understand technology and then bring them into scalability. That exactly in Switzerland has this gap. I think it will be very much interesting topic we can further explore. That's something I want to share with the panelists.
So specifically, we have these great technologies coming out of ETH and other powerhouses in Switzerland and Europe. And you're saying this great technology very often gets harvested somewhere else.
Yes.
What needs to be done in Switzerland?
I make one case or two cases very interesting. One is a professor in EPFL, and he's already Swiss but Chinese background. They spin off a company for material science and applied for hydrogen. And very interesting, he shared with me, we discussed a lot, that he said, indeed in Switzerland they get a lot of good support from the lab, or from the research to the lab. But from lab to the fab, he realized that there's only one choice, is go to China in the Yangtze Delta area, because there, 3 months, you already build up your fab. And here, even though you have the fund, probably you still need 8 months or 1 year to build up this facility. So exactly as our colleagues mentioned here, the speed and efficiency, I think in China, especially when you do manufacturing, if you have a good technology from EPFL or from ADH, you can develop very well from the research to the lab. But once you want to try certain scale, either you probably think about US or Germany at first stage, or you can also think about China. Here, I would say really you need a good, the team who can research on this market and product fit. Without this, kind of solid research or practice, maybe this spin-off will always stay or stagnating. In second case, exactly what I personally invested this vertical wind turbine company. It's very good technology. Actually, it's not a spin-off from research, it's by entrepreneurs. But still in Switzerland, it's very hard to gain the resources to let them scale up in a speed that, match the VC or growth capital's appetite. It's rather slow. Now they just have a first technical pilot in Winterthur, connects the data for this machine. I believe it still has a technology advantage because in China there are some professors also doing this similar project, but not as good as this one, but it's already 10 years. Let's say after 5 years, I think this advantage probably will be shortened. So I think it's nice that we're talking about public-private partnership. Also share the idea with Philip and also other colleagues. Maybe in Switzerland we can have a team. And the team is exactly like today, our audience here, who is research or academia or industry or political community could sit together and to formulate a Swiss national team, being ready for the Olympic Games or this type of mentality, and then to find a good partner to help this, beautiful baby to grow. and to be a athlete in future games. So that's somehow I want to.
Looking at what is happening around us, not only in green tech, but also in digital technologies, in AI and so on, we do have a challenge as Switzerland due to the fact that we don't have an industrial policy, so to say. We don't have this industrial policy approach, which sometimes leads to the fact that it takes more time for our actors to get together, public, private innovation, to come forward with commercialization of developments. But I want to ask you a last question and actually give it to all 4 panelists and then open it up also for questions from your side. You mentioned it, that a lot of investment is going into AI, digital technologies at the moment. How can we make sure that these investments help us reach the sustainable development goals and not make it even more difficult?
I think it's quite an interesting topic. As I studied computer science, and later on I shifted my career into sustainability because I was driven by the German philosopher like Hegel and Kant, also Karl Marx. I mean, their wisdom is still valid now. I think like information technology is something so fundamental and date back to our early stage when we create our, the language, and then come to this storage of information, transmission of information. I think sustainability, if you think about some targets, and every target needs this kind of enabling productivity of using information and assembling information. I would rather think as a comprehensive way that actually sustainability is a philosophy. It's not a, let's say, it's a that we reach sustainability. It's a way of thinking, and when we develop information technology, also to utilize it, to use AI or these robots, we need to really step back and think about how a human could benefit from it. So currently, I would say competition is a key, and the US and China really pump a lot of investment. As far as I know from my current employer, this is very strong players, and the investment or the strategy all come to the AI. And you really need a industry policy. Without industry policy, this type of investment topic, I think there's you basically lost the compass. So I think each government probably also need to learn this topic. I think at least in China, my friends who used to work for state-owned enterprise or government, everyone is also taking the workshop to learn what is AI and what does ChatGPT means, or what does the DeepSeek means. So I think it's about our current attitude to it, to learn it and to be prepared. For a country like Switzerland, I personally would suggest also this, the private sector could be more, kind of propelled to accept it. And because I used to run my own startup with AI technology, but nobody is really, they rather ignore this implication. So now you cannot ignore. Yeah.
Industrial policy would be your way forward to a certain extent also for Switzerland. Victor, any thoughts on this technological question?
I think from our perspective, Costa Rica has a very well-developed industrial policy, I would say. We have benefits for attracting investment into our country in several high-tech sectors, medical devices, for example. We have a very well-developed cluster of medical devices. Mainly who is who in the industry are located in Costa Rica. already, we make a lot of components that, level 3, level 4, that sustain life. I mean, that's very good. And in that sense, most of the companies that we deal with are of course compliant with sustainability goals. And I mean, I think that's a given in those sectors. But the real challenge, I think, is, as I mentioned before, is this duality of outcomes, in the sense that, from the sustainability point of view, take into account the 3 pillars, sustainable outcomes or environmental outcomes, social outcomes, and economic outcomes. Those sectors that are linked directly with the FDI are okay. But the challenge is how to channel investment towards other sectors where people are in the need of jobs, or good quality jobs, but for people that, for example, have not completed the school, people that don't speak English. And those sectors are probably linked with agriculture, or mainly agriculture, that you need less skills. So how do you convince firms to establish in our country, to engage in activities, for example, as in the case of Africa? I mean, Costa Rica could look very sophisticated from an African point of view, but we have areas in our country that have the same development stage as in Africa, because this duality of outcomes. So I think the challenge is how to convince, invest in farming. Many of the bananas you eat in Switzerland are still from Costa Rica. Most of the pineapples come from Costa Rica, but how we enlarge these investments, I think that's a real challenge.
Sticking to agribusinesses, we're moving to Africa, Roland. Technological change in this field, using AI to be more efficient in...
I would have just maybe a slight different approach, in the sense, to me, I'm not worried about the AI and the sustainability, because these guys are publicly listed company under so much pressure. I was more thinking about the people, the jobs who are going to be lost because of AI. So I think, to me, the biggest challenge of AI, at least for countries like Switzerland or Europe, is going to be on the education side, because there are hundreds of jobs who are going to disappear. I mean, we're talking millions of people, but hundreds of jobs: legal clerk, translator, travel agency, which is et cetera. All these guys are going to disappear. Then what are they going to do? So I think the whole education system is going to have to adapt itself pretty quickly, because, why should we train people to do something which doesn't exist? Except that, when Mr. Ford made his car in 1905, whatever, we had 5-10 years reaction. Now we have months to react. So that's probably what I see the biggest challenge.
I don't want to be cynic, but we also need less and less people to find a job, given our demography, which is inverse to what you have described in Africa. So all the young generation will come from Africa. You mentioned, I think, 1/4 of the world population in 2040 will be African. What does this technological revolution mean from this perspective?
But I think back to the point earlier, again, this is, to me, no offense, but this is a very European way to look at things. Right now, I mean, for example, in our farms, in our factories, we don't want too much industry, don't want to have too much mechanizations. Because we want to give jobs to people. So it's I'm not saying it's right or wrong, it's just different. People, when you have half the population who is unemployed, and of course you want better jobs, of course you want to educate the people, of course you want to upgrade them. But first and foremost, these guys need to bring food to the family every single freaking day. And for that, we need to offer jobs, and that's really the priority. AI, okay, later.
Risto, your perspective on the technological revolution and what it means for sustainable development.
I think I had a discussion the other day with one of our data developers who develops the in-house climate data for us. And I told her, I must be brilliant, know all this AI that helps you a lot in the development of the data and all this. And she was like, yeah, well, yes, in one side, yes, it is a support, obviously. On the other side, she said, like, there's so much data available, and I don't know whether I can trust it, because it becomes easier to manipulate things also. So where's the source? Where can I really rely on it? Then when it comes to really, to the work I do is like really kind of focusing on a specific site before doing an on-site assessment. I mean, already obviously nowadays they're using Google Street View and all this gives you a lot of information on it. You look at the building, okay, does it have a glass facade and all this, Now, okay, speaking about the impact of hail or so, or PV panels on the roof, wind exposure to these PV panels, is it resilient or not? In the future, I can imagine if I could get additional information on, the resistance class of the glass facade, that would help a lot, But then again, building up resilience, I think it's, as mentioned in the keynote by Rico earlier this morning, it's easy speaking about it, but then really implementing it is a different story. And I still believe, you can't email a handshake, So if I really want to get the buy-in from a person who's the site responsible, so I better go on site, speak to the person, get his view of things, and then I think it's more likely that things will change. So I think it's very good to use these new tools. I think you have to use a pragmatic approach on it, but it won't replace the personal exchange with a human being.
Okay, I'm through with all my questions, and I'm really looking forward to getting the audience involved. You've been listening to this discussion about challenges, how they turn into opportunities, how technology can play into this. Who can I give the word to? Yes, please. Maybe just a quick intro to know where you're coming from.
Oh, yes. My name is Christian Brennemann. I'm a speaker this afternoon, so you will hear what I have to say. I have a question to Roland. I was very interested. I mean, we are all thinking about, Africa, how can we support? And I absolutely agree with all the statements you made about aid in Africa, and it's usually a dilemma. I mean, you would like to help somehow, but what is the right thing? And I think it's absolutely a fact that in investments in companies the right thing, but this is it's not so easy to actually do. And I have I have friends which are planting trees, and that's usually also very difficult projects, because as soon as they work, then the government comes in, and then they suddenly they can't do it anymore. But what about education? I mean, I always thought, you really we should invest in education. How efficient do you think this is actually working?
Yeah, also education is obviously key for obvious reasons. The thing is, it's a chicken and egg situation, because if you educate people, but they don't have a job to go to, and how many people, I don't know enough about Switzerland, but I know France, how many African students go to France, and once they graduate, go back to Africa? Some do, but most stay in Europe, So this is also a very, very tricky thing that, one point could say, but let's educate them here. But, if they get, you get out of ETH, I mean, I've seen some numbers with guys going to Google. I mean, you're 22, 23, and you get, 150,000 Swiss franc. Well, you need to be really motivated to go back to your country. So this is why I think education, yes, but I still believe, I'm not trying to be too Swiss, but the best thing, apart from ETA and EPFL, which have in Switzerland, is the apprenticeship system. And I think that's one of the often underrated secret of Switzerland. And this is what no offense to France, has done completely wrong. And, everybody needs to have a baccalaureate, and then you have plenty of unemployed people. So to me, if I was to invest in education in Africa, they have enough universities. Some are okay, some are good, but I would really invest in apprenticeship. I think that's the part of education which you target really manual skills, which are, and frankly, by the way, my wife is from Madagascar. In Madagascar, and many African, you are a good plumber can earn 3 times a good doctor. Because, not to talk about PhD in philosophy and whatever, So apprenticeship, that would be. Yeah, so this is why investments, and that's the trick, because, in our case, now we're doing better and we're making money, so finally we can find more investors. But initially, basically, one potential investor said, okay, Roland, so basically what you're telling me, we're advertising, we can give you more or less 8 to 10% return net in dollar, not in euro, in Swiss franc. And then the guy was telling me, so basically, Roland, what you ask me is you want me to invest in a higher risk with a lower return than what I could get in Switzerland. And that's the skill, that's the pitch. So invest with me, if you're really honest. How many funds in Africa have performed according to promise? Close to 0. So instead of keep promising what you know you're not going to achieve, let's manage expectation. So you're not going to go mainstream, you're basically becoming more niche, but at least you have with people who says, I'm not asking you to give me money, but I'm just telling you that we're going to give you a decent return. So that's that. And second, what I would do is when I look at investments, again, check with people who know what they're talking about. So if you have people, Bahnhofstrasse, Quai du Mont Blanc in Genève, who basically have a double PhD in Excel and PowerPoint, but who have never really worked anywhere or built a factory or whatever, stay away from these guys. But if you have people who are, if not ideally based there, or at least have some industry expertise and etc., I think that the risk is lower, and I would invest with these people.
Markus, may I jump in this one?
Sure.
I want to emphasize what Roland said. I think education is, of course, very important. But what people need now is a job. And so I think if we were Finland with the best education system, perhaps of the world, it will take more than a generation for level up everyone. So the role of firms is very important into providing jobs, but at the same time with the Swiss system of apprenticeship to level up most of the people.
We have tried to, so to say, export our apprenticeship system, but it's extremely complex because it's not only the education part as such, it's the whole ecosystem that is usually not comparable. Even in Germany, it's not the same as in Switzerland. But I have one more question over here.
Thanks. Thanks to the whole panel. It's really interesting. My name is Janet Herring. I'm the former director of ERWAG, the Water Research Institute, the ETH domain, and a professor emeritus at ETH Zurich and EPFL. And as you probably can tell from my accent, I'm originally from the United States. I'm now a dual citizen. But of course, I still pay taxes in the United States. I noticed taxation was not mentioned once. I would like everybody to know that I, personally, pay more taxes to the United States than Jeff Bezos. Right? This is why people are so pissed off. Right? I'm not a populist. I'm not. But I understand sometimes that instinct. There are guys who are unbelievably wealthy, and they are not paying taxes. And these companies have an unbelievable amount of money, and they are not paying corporate taxes. And I think we really need to address that problem. And then we would have some of the money we need to fund the SDGs. They've done some calculations on what it would take in terms of taxes to fund the SDGs, and the money is there. We know where the money is. And in fact, there was just the, South Africa was last year. They had the presidency of the G20, and they commissioned a report on finances. And and it basically have a couple graphs that just show where is the money. It's pretty straightforward. And if we can't get our hands on some of that money, we're not going to solve these problems.
Any views from the panel?
Maybe I would like to also share this interesting case from US. Is actually Bill Gates made a good project, the Breakthrough Energy, that is similar like we say, but they really have some, let's say, capability building to help the entrepreneurs to scale up their technology. Because recent several years I was in Europe, also deal with these colleagues. I think this is a good case, but I think it's minor. For SDG, you really need a national strength from very systematic will to deal with this topic in a long horizon. That's why I think it's something like Hegel said, the human didn't learn anything from history. The only lesson they learn from history is that they learn nothing from history, but I think it's a dialectic thinking. We learn from history. We need to be patient for SDG goals, but we should keep very strong international institute. Like in the past, the US has made good contribution on the World Bank. Of course, it's a little bit serving the interests of the US, but I think that's still very valid institution in the world, and also the UN initiatives. But now we need to really bring the force, like the capital, and also the know-how, and also, as you mentioned, these entrepreneurs coming to this, be aligned to deal with these challenges. And then the infrastructure is exactly where all these, let's say these folks could be, that because not only in Africa, even in Germany or in some region in China, they all need infrastructure upgrading so that people can see the chances of employment. AI right now just influence a very small amount of people. I think actually programmer, technician, also data analytics are the most impacted by this AI. They lost their job, not the hand worker.
On the taxation question, the rich tax. We had a popular vote in Switzerland recently. It was turned down by 80%. More than 80% of the population to tax the rich more and to use this money for climate change mitigation and adaptation.
Yeah, so going back to her question, in the case of Costa Rica, I think taxation is not a real problem in the way that you put it in the US. However, people are angry because they feel that the system is not working for them. And so it's very difficult to convince, a farmer or, a small entrepreneur to join the system, to pay taxes. And then you have the problems of informality. So people are not contributing for a pension. They don't have Social Security. They don't have insurance, and that's the real problem. So the populists, on the other hand, what they are offering people is, we are with you, but we have, in order to give you hope, we have to destroy the institutions. Okay, and that's people that have no hope at all. They say, I don't care. Let's destroy everything. So the populist message is we will rebuild the country from the ashes, and that's very dangerous everywhere. But in the case of Costa Rica, that's a real danger these days.
Next question, Antonio.
Yeah, maybe to Antonio, you and Global Compact. Exactly to your point, we didn't discuss the system as such. And here we face some challenges, some serious challenges. Where is the capital accumulated and staying? And if I would have the solution, I would get the Nobel Prize. But I think we are facing right now, in this time, questions we have to discuss. And I'm happy about this meeting yesterday and today because we are trying to find solutions. We are trying to discuss, and it's not that easy just distribute some money. It's much more complex. I just bring one point, that is the living wage debate. We are working strongly on the question on living wage, because with living wages, if we would have them, if we have the jobs, that's the problem. We have too many people, so the wages go down. Employers can manage that, and we do not really have the way out. But I think we have to think about the system, because if each and everyone would gain a wage of which he or she can live off, the problem of poverty would be resolved. It sounds very simple, it's very complex. But I think we have to think about, because our capitalistic system has these factors which do not allow that people develop. And then it's even more complex, good governance. I mean, if you see certain governments in Africa, but also in other continents, who are caring for themselves and not for the common good of their population, which is one of the main issues. I also say, if all the governments on this planet would really look for their people and care for their people, this planet would look differently. So I do not have the solutions, but it's these little points. I will come to the conclusion afterwards where I see hope, because if we join forces, we do step by step. We will not save the world tomorrow, but we who stay in academic institutions, in businesses, we have a certain influence. And if we go on with these debates and do what we can do where we stay, we can make a difference.
Yeah, and maybe actually it's a very interesting point that you started, right? I think that one thing that we also not discuss, right, and you touched it a little bit, is greed, right? So we have this big corporation, for example, let's talk about US, like where they are on the stock market, they make a lot of money, still the workers are on food stamps, they don't have health insurance, and this is US, Yeah. And now, like I look also I have a 13 years old, right? So I see actually was the mentality that is changing in our side of the world. So when I was young, we were never thinking about money. We were thinking, what interesting job do I want to have once I finish studies? If I look at these young people, why do I have to study? What is the role what's the point of education? And what they see on YouTubes and TikTok and so on is a way to make quick money. Right, and so we have these two sides of the coin, right? On one end, like countries that still have to develop, and then we have the developed countries that are going in a direction that is scary, and all is about money and greed and so on, right? How do we address this?
Any thoughts from the panel? How do we address the ambition of the young generation?
Maybe I can share my personal interest, because I have a rather young wife. She's a kind of a generation who already, every day experiences from social media. I also have the social media experiences, but I really agree with you that currently, if you live in the society, you are every day be manipulated by the algorithm through your mobile, and I think this is not a good direction for human beings, because then you will consume and you entertain by some ideas. That is really terrible. I think we should still go back to education with reading classical, this valuable stuff of human beings, rather than every day in this, materialism or consumption-oriented lifestyle. And then your value system is really kind of will be very hollow. So what I want to share is that university is super important. Education from primary to high school still should be there, but then it's demand good education mentality. I mean, which means maybe also the researcher, also the policymaker need to design accordingly, also have a better curriculum, have a better way to, as you also mentioned, maybe bring people to the dual system to do some handwork, to do some, not in the virtual life. So that's just what I want to make a comment.
Just personally, I have to say, especially for my two daughters, 19 and 17, if I ask them to think long term, they look at me and say, "You leave us a planet in a mess, and you ask us to think long term." So basically, I'm under a bit of pressure if I have to force them to think long term. But I have gotten the sign for 5 more minutes. That makes one more question and one final round. Who can I give the floor for the final question? Yes?
I'm here, Diego Stocklin from the Hochschule Luzern. It's difficult to translate climate risks into potential benefits or resilient opportunities. I have a question for Rosti. It's that how is it possible to provide clear business cases to board members or to companies and make climate risk into operational opportunities? Because everything needs to be financial language based. And how is it working from your end or at your end? Thank you.
Yes, you're absolutely right. That's in fact a challenge that we face because I mean, many of these investments, especially when you then break it down to the site level, so you speak to the site manager and say, okay, you should implement this and that, and build a wall or whatever, or even if you think about fire protection, I mean, it's not natural hazard related, but also that's also building resilience, a sprinkler system or so. So you do potentially do a lot of investments, and obviously, I mean, what you say is like the KPIs of these persons are very short-term driven. It's next quarter, maybe next half year, next year is already far away, and in 2 years he is going to be somewhere else. So this is very difficult, yes, and I think it's very depending also kind of on the culture that the company has, So some companies, you see, it's clearly, I mean, some people. Some potential clients, which I know I've spoken to in the past, I realize I probably will give up. It's not on their agenda. I mean, they're not interested in. Some of them are very frank about it. They say, I don't care. So it's because, I mean, if you look at about the flood exposure, we look at 100 years return period, earthquake 475 years return periods. So, you can gamble and say, it's not going to happen, until I'm leaving. So yes, and then in some companies, obviously, also to close maybe on a more positive side, no, they say this is part of we want to do that. It's kind of also they see the broader picture, also the society, protecting also the workplaces and all this. And this is where they say, okay, yes, they want to do it. And then obviously from the other side, from the reporting side, I mean, TCFD, CSRD, and so. I mean, there is a certain pressure from this side coming that you, up to a certain degree, there is an obligation, let's say, in some of the countries where you need to report and disclose these risks. And so this can also be an entry point. But it is very individual, and it is a challenge for sure.
So not only the young generation sometimes has difficulties think long term, right? I want to make a final round, unprepared, very short answer. What is going to be your investment into sustainable and inclusive technological change within the next 6 to 12 months? Very short, can be on a personal level, can be on a corporate level. Who wants to go first?
Well, maybe kind of answer your question, but also going back to the youth. To me, so to end up on a positive, to me, I have a bit different view in the sense that I'm actually quite positive, and my best investment in the future are my children. So I happen to be the father of 2 young adults and 2 teenagers, and actually, so maybe I'm exceptions, I don't think so, I'm actually very positive. I'm very optimistic because we have a generation now, 2 things. One, you have a generation now who is willing to put the purpose in their life as a first priority. Was not my priority when I got out of university, I can tell you that. Okay, so now you have a generation with some downside, but the upside is I only want to do which I can debate if it's right or wrong. That's not the point. The point is what they think is right, and to have a purpose in their life is key, even if that means 40% less salary. That's, as far as I know, the first time we have that for many, many years. Number two, again, we've seen it in Africa, but also in Asia, the Gen Z. The Gen Z came, my wife from Madagascar, basically the Gen Z changed the government based on good reasons, which happens to be electricity and water, which is pretty basic. So when you have the youth who is willing to risk their life to change corrupt governments for the better of a country, which you have a youth who is willing to sacrifice their income to have a bigger, better purpose in life, I'm confident.
So investment into our kids. Perfect positive note, Risto.
Maybe taking up what Laurent said, I don't have any children yet, so that's a project I could take up.
6 to 12 months.
Yes, no, I think that's definitely gone. No ambitions in this regard, but I think it's more about also think global but act local. Also in terms of consumer behavior on a very personal side. Do I need to buy clothes which are produced at the other end of the world, or can I support a local, let's say, a local artisan which is here, so you avoid the whole CO2 emissions along the supply chain and all this. I think this is something
huge
I try to do. That's nothing new. We ask for something new, but I keep on doing that.
Huge leverage we have.
Yeah, maybe I can share my view on this investment from sustainability angle. If I'm sitting let's say I'm an employer, this institutional investor, I definitely would go into this infrastructure, renewable energy part, because that contributes sustainability. That also can generate return. Absolutely, contracted cash flow, what pension fund or all this insurance need.
Something very specific you have.
Exactly, specific battery. Smart grid. EV car charging, but maybe put it aside till later. And hydrogen also a little bit later, but this two-part grid operator upgrading battery, lithium battery for stationary storage, definitely will be my bet. But as private, I also want to share with everyone here, as individual, if you want to avoid the risk, I think at current stage, maybe not so into so-called this very conceptual investment thing. Maybe concretely to this, in U.S. stocks with these concrete products.
Okay. Yeah. Umaña.
Thank you. I would like to make 3 brief points. The first one, from a positive note, I think sustainability has been central to Costa Rican identity, and that has allowed us to attract FDI, good quality FDI, and create a lot of good jobs. So sustainability is a must. Second, institutions matter. We have taken them for granted. We have to continue build institutions and renovate institutions. And third, I think a good investment would be on the international level to work on developing a coalition of like-minded countries that still believe in cooperation, that still believe in sustainability. And I think Europe has a great responsibility here, as is one of the few areas of the world that still believe in these things. And I'm sure that many other countries will follow if you take the lead. Thanks.
I think we just got a topic for the next panel discussion, how to create this coalition. With these examples, I think you have shown that the 2030 agenda, the SDGs are very much alive, although we don't talk about them very much anymore, but they're maybe not alive because of a ideology, but because of pure and simple investment opportunities. And with this, I would like to thank this great panel, Victor Umaña, Jason Jiang, Risto Schmid, Roland Decourvet, and I think we can give them a big applause. Thank you.